Hi, this is Randal Schwartz, host of FLOSS Weekly. This week, Newcomb joins me. We're going to be talking to David Skoll about Remind, old school command line stuff that lets you get messages about what's coming up. You're going to want to see this, so stay tuned.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for FLOSS Weekly is provided by Cachefly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is FLOSS Weekly with Randal Schwartz and Aaron Newcomb. Episode 199, recorded January 25th, 2012. Remind. It's time for FLOSS Weekly, the show about free, libre, open source software. I'm your host, Randal Schwartz, Merlin at Stonehenge.com. Back again in the big seat, back again in the big chair, taking over the thing. I was gone last week on a cruise, so I had to wait for my two co-hosts who did a brilliant job at that, Simon and Dan, working that show last week. But I'm back. And not only am I back, I brought back Aaron Newcomb. Aaron, welcome back to the show.
Hey, great to be back. It seems like we just saw each other.
Oh yes, we were both at Scale briefly. I was there. You were there the whole time, but I was only there briefly, and so we'll talk about that at the end of the show. But I also have to say thanks again to Media Temple for hosting me. And if you hear a little bit of extra reverb, they've moved me to a different room, so I sound like I'm in this giant cathedral, when in fact it's a 3-story tall open space with windows along a whole big wall. So if I sound a little echoey, I'm going to try to fix that by next week. We'll get a different room for this next week. We have a really interesting guest today. It's not often that I have done a show on a command line program. But this week's guest is David Skoll, who's been working on this Remind tool. Remind is a to-do manager, not really a to-do manager, but like a reminder, like a calendar generator. So like if you want to make sure that every 4th of July, a little message comes up somewhere, or maybe you see it in a calendar that you print out, it'll figure out things like that, and so it's going to be it's going to be interesting. But it's weird. I mean, it's been around, I guess, almost 15, 20 years. So it's a really old project in terms of growing and doing things like that. And as I kept reading the man page for it, I kept looking at it. The man page goes on forever because this thing even has an embedded programming language. So you can say a reminder should happen on this computed day, which I thought was really kind of odd. Have you had a chance to review this at all yet, Aaron?
No, I haven't. So I'm actually very anxious to talk to David about this. It seems like a really good. I love command line tools that are easy to use because I'm often in the command line. It just makes life easier when you can just type in a quick command and get something done, and you don't have to worry about your Windows environment or what else you're doing. You just drop to a terminal, type it in, exit, done, quick, easy. So I'm hoping that this tool is that kind of a tool.
Yeah, and I also think there are some, it's not just a strict text command tool. It looks like it's got some importing things, so maybe I can export this to my iCal on my laptop here, or maybe I think even also Google Calendar and stuff. So I'll check to see if we can do stuff from that. But I think that's who we've got on. So let's, without further ado, let's go ahead and bring on our guests.
Thanks for having me.
Very good, very good. And where are you speaking to us from?
I'm speaking to you from Ottawa, Canada. Which is cold and icy.
Okay. And I'm in wonderful Culver City, which happens to be warm today, which is really nice. But this isn't a show about weather reports, although we often do start this way for some strange reason. But this show is about Remind. Now, I took a kind of a wild stab at describing what I was able to research about Remind at the beginning of the show. But let's start with your description of it. But first, let's start from what problem is it solving? So what problem would I have if I'm going to turn to Remind?
The problem that Remind is supposed to solve is to be a calendar program that just works and doesn't require all kinds of exceptions and things like that for holidays. But actually, the original problem it was trying to solve was Unix withdrawal. I was exposed to a Unix system back in 1989, and I encountered the calendar utility. And then in my job, I had to work on MS-DOS, and I really missed calendar. So I wrote Remind as a simple replacement for calendar, just so I could have an equivalent facility on MS-DOS. And from there, it just kind of morphed and grew features and became much bigger than the original program.
I remember the original calendar program because, I'm a Unix guy since 1977, so I have a pretty good sense of all that. But the thing that I was overwhelmed with as I was researching for the show was just the sheer volume of what Remind has in it now. Did it start with just a few features and then sort of work its way up?
Yeah, it started basically as a calendar replacement, so it would print whatever was happening today or tomorrow or Monday, and that's pretty much it. And then it grew a little bit more complicated up until about version 2. Then I forgot about it for a while, and I had to do a master's thesis. So in order to avoid working on my master's, I rewrote it as version 3, and that's when all the fancy features started appearing in the program, and it really grew into what it is today.
Okay, and so the basic feature from as I'm reading the man page is just the simple sort of, I've got a date and maybe a date and a time, I guess, for some time-oriented events, and it's just a line in a text field, or a text file. So you're using your favorite text editor, whatever it happens to be, and you're just editing lines in a text file. Is that a good synopsis of sort of the basic process?
Yeah, exactly. It's, as I said, I was suffering from Unix withdrawal, so Remind is very old school Unix in the sense that it doesn't have a GUI really. You just create the configuration file with a text editor and then run it on the configuration file. So the easy stuff is really easy to do. If you have birthdays, like my birthday is January 6th, so you put in rem jan 6 message David's birthday, and that's it, one simple line. But you can have more complicated things, like for example, if you have a code review meeting every Wednesday, except if that Wednesday happens to be a holiday, then it's moved to the following Thursday. Remind's configuration language lets you express that pretty concisely, and you don't have to worry about being reminded on the wrong date anytime in the future. Okay,
and so I have a file with maybe multiple files because there's includes, right? So I have a file that has these one-line entries in them for the most part. I guess you can also continue to the next line with a backslash escape. But so I have this file now. What can I do with that file with these date information? Do I just run a command and everything comes out that's upcoming for the next week or so?
Yeah, there are a number of ways you can use the file. The simplest one is just to run remind with the file name as an argument, and then it prints all your upcoming events. In another mode, you can get it to generate a nice PostScript calendar, so you can print out a calendar with all your events on it. And although I said Remind doesn't have a GUI, there are some front ends that provide a GUI. And one that ships with Remind is called TK Remind. So it'll give you a little calendar on your desktop with all your appointments and events in the calendar boxes. And you can also have it so that, 5 or 10 or 15 minutes before the event, it pops up a little window saying, meeting in 15 minutes. You can configure it however you like, to bug you as far in advance as you want and as often as you want.
And that's the other thing I was just struck by, the sheer complexity of how you could describe things. I mean, I started seeing Easter calculations and Mardi Gras offsets from that, and in sunrise and sunset, provided you tell it what latitude and longitude you're at, and how did you? Were all of these things that you like you saw in other like calendar programs? Went, I've got to have that. It was that kind of like calendar envy.
It wasn't so much calendar envy as I thought, well, this would be cool, or it would be things people had asked for. Like the sunrise and sunset calculation times, people had asked for that, so I did some research and coded that up. The moon phase times were pretty easy to do. I found some public domain software for doing that. And it let you do really cool things with Remind, like a blue moon. I don't know if you've heard the expression once in a blue moon.
Yeah.
So technically, a blue moon is the second full moon in a calendar month, in a Gregorian calendar month. And they're actually pretty rare. So Remind wasn't done until you could write commands to tell you when the next blue moon was. So you can actually write a Remind script portion that calculates when the next time you'll have a second full moon in a month is, and it can remind you of that. So I guess if you're a werewolf or a witch or something, that's handy.
So David, let me jump in here for a second. I mean, this thing has evolved considerably since it started, right? I mean, I read something about it evolving into its own programming language or something. What's that all about?
Right. Initially, as I said, I wrote a replacement for the Unix calendar tool, which gives you 1 day's advance warning. Then I needed new features like more than 1 day advance warning. If I'm going to send my sister a birthday card across the continent, I need more than a day. So I modified the language to include that. And so a few minor little features like that got added. When I did the version 3 rewrite, I said, well, this is going to be really ambitious. I want a program that will have any kind of weird conditions that could affect when something happens. I want to be able to express that and never have to think about it again. And the only way I could see to do that was to write sort of a proper programming language. Remind is not actually Turing complete, and I can explain why in a minute. But I wrote an expression parser and a proper sort of programming language so that I could express things like, I have a meeting every Wednesday except on a holiday when it's moved to a Thursday. Oh, and if there's a full moon that same day, remind me, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to be able to do anything.
So talk about that. You mentioned Turing complete. So, I mean, we should talk about what that is, and then you can explain why that doesn't qualify.
Right. So a programming language is Turing complete. I don't know the formal technical definition, but if it can compute any computable function, then it's Turing complete. Any modern programming language like C or Perl or PHP or Ruby or whatever is obviously Turing complete. The problem with Turing complete languages is that you can't know for sure that a program written in that language will actually terminate eventually. That's called the halting problem. When I first wrote Remind, it was a replacement for Calendar, and one of the features of Calendar was that root could run it, and it would look in everybody's calendar file and send them an email about upcoming events. So I wanted Remind to be able to run in that mode too. So Remind can be set up to open every user's .reminder file, pull out the upcoming events, and send an email. And you really don't want people to be able to write, either accidentally or maliciously, a reminder file that never terminates. So there's no looping construct in Remind, there's no branching construct, and there's no recursion. Mm. So the absence of those three things ensures that any Remind script will eventually terminate.
Right.
But it also limits what you can do.
Right, right. Well, let's talk about the limits of what you can do a little bit. I mean, I'm just kind of envisioning this in my... So I haven't used it before, so I should say that. So if I say something crazy, you can just say, no, you don't get it. But,
right.
I mean, could you use this to, for example, I'm thinking about organizationally, like a corporation. I've got a lot of developers. They're always in a console or in a terminal window. And I want to be able to remind them through the terminal window or through their console that something's happening, right? Something's going on. And so I program that in. Is there a way for me to use that to notify, push out a notification to everybody? I know there's other tools for this, but could I use Remind for that?
Yeah. Remind only issues reminders. But part of what it means to issue a reminder is you can have it run an arbitrary program.
Right.
So you could have it run a broadcast thing that sends a message to everybody's console. It's pretty easy. You could even do that probably with a shell script in Unix. Mm-hmm. So Remind takes care of all the date calculations and figuring out when to do something. And then you can use other tools to actually do it.
Right.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So one example, my company uses Asterisk for our phone system. And I hate remembering when I have to flip it into holiday mode so that people get a different greeting saying that we're closed. Mm-hmm. So I just wrote a reminder file with all the holidays for where we live. So every time you call us, our Asterisk system actually calls out to remind, and if it is a holiday, it goes to a different part of the menu than if it isn't. So I never need to remember to put the phone system in holiday mode.
Ah, it's a great example of how to use it. Now, could I also interface with, I'm guessing I can from the sound of it, interface with like Google Calendar, for example, or some external resource to be able to pull those things into Remind?
Yeah. Now, this isn't part of the Remind distribution, but there are some third-party programs for converting iCal to Remind. That works quite well. Going the other way is a little trickier because remind can express things that are just impossible to express with iCal. So going from remind to iCal is a little bit lossy, but there are scripts to do it.
So you could do it. You just have to make sure that you're using the iCal standard correctly.
Yes.
Right. Now, let me ask a little bit lighthearted now, getting off the more serious stuff. If I'm a user of Remind, does that make me a reminder? I couldn't help it.
Maybe it makes you a remindee. I don't know.
So maybe if I'm contributing to Remind, I'm a reminder, and if I'm a user, I'm a remindee.
Yes.
So, do you have any idea of who's using this? And I think that's a great example of the Asterisk server, for example. Doing a lookup using Remind. But is there any other programs that require Remind or use Remind, or are there any companies using Remind for to kind of do their daily activities?
Okay, I'll take the program thing first. If you look on free code, which used to be freshmeat.net, and search for Remind, you'll see a handful of programs that use Remind as the back end, and they provide a GUI. So there's one called WX Remind, and then I think there were a couple of others that were macOS specific. In terms of users of Remind, I doubt that many companies use it, because one of the more important limitations of Remind is that it's really a personal calendar program. It doesn't have a concept of shared calendars, and there's no really nice way to share calendars between different people or among different people. There are a lot of individual users. I run a mailing list, and there are probably a couple of hundred people on that. And most of the users, I would guess, are just using it like a personal information management thing, just for their own personal reminders.
I was just going to say, it sounds like something that right up Gina Trapani's alley. I would be surprised if she's not using this for some of her, shell task list stuff that she does.
It could be. I know that it was stumbled upon by a Mac OS user a while back who blogged about it, and there were like all these Mac OS users saying, "Wow, command line, that's amazing! I didn't know you could do all this stuff."
Now, what's the basic interface of this thing? I mean, it's you're editing a text file and you're running the remind command on that. I saw a couple of things about remind daemon, and with timed events, it sits in the background. Can you explain more about how that works?
Right. So the remind daemon by itself is pretty much completely useless, because all it does is spew output to the standard out. But if you take a front-end program like the TK Remind GUI that Remind ships with, it basically runs Remind in the background connected with a couple of pipes. And so when it's time for a reminder to pop up, the daemon in the background sends a little message across the pipe, and that causes the front-end GUI to pop up the reminder. So this lets you write GUIs with a nice separation of code. Your GUI doesn't need to know anything about fancy date calculation, and Remind doesn't need to know anything about X11 or GUI programming.
That's good separation of concerns. One of the things I saw about this, though, there was this something that there was some mode that I saw that you could do it in. You would have it like in your login script, and then you would stay running the entire time you in the background while you're logged in, and then terminate itself or something. Am I misremembering?
That's true. You can run it like that, although that's not really useful anymore. That was pretty useful back in 1990. When,
okay.
I would still log into a Unix system without using X Windows or any kind of graphical interface. But now that's pretty much a relic, and you'd run TK Remind or some other front end if you want to keep it running in the background.
And now I'm going to show a little bit of my Unix expertise and also discussed at the same time. And that one of the things that's always been troubling over the years is cron syntax. And I'm wondering if I could use the much more expressive power, together with maybe the run keyword, to really replace cron entirely with something like this.
You probably could. I'm not so sure that it would be a good idea. I don't know that the remind syntax is that much of an improvement over the cron syntax.
Okay, I'll give you one example. You want to run a backup on the last day of the month. And
Right,
doing
yeah.
that with cron is just crazy. You got to spell out all the 31 and 30 day things and 28 day things and stuff. But with this, is just day 1 minus 1, right?
Yeah. So you could do that. What I do, actually, I've done that in a few situations. What I do is I have a cron job that runs every day, but all it does is invoke remind on a reminder file that decides if it should really be run or not. Because cron, it's a system daemon. It's designed to reread its files when it's hopped. It presumably has some security measures in place for changing users and things like that remind lacks.
Mm-hmm.
So a combination of cron and remind is perfect for that kind of thing.
Wow, that sounds really cool then. Because, like I said, as soon as I start seeing the syntax about how expressive this thing is, I also like the idea, as you're explaining in the manual, that you want it's pretty easy in a lot of applications to say like the second Tuesday or the third Wednesday, but you had an example of, was it the voting day is the first Tuesday after the second Monday or something like that?
Yeah.
And how much easier that is to say? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and the first Tuesday after the first Monday is just silly, because you might as well say, well, it's the first Tuesday on or after the 8th of the month. I think that's right.
I think it'd be the second Tuesday, the first Tuesday after the second Monday or something like that, yeah.
Yeah, I'd have to look up in the file how to do it, but yeah, it's pretty easy to express that in our mind.
Yeah, so let's see if I've covered like most of the interfaces here. So I can run, remind, and get, I think you said earlier, just a text, like something I put in my email every day. I can run, remind, and get like I haven't heard the word postscript in a long time, so it's funny that it still does this, but it's a postscript thing that I could print out on any postscript compatible printer, and probably convert that to a PDF and send it to things that look like PDFs. And also said, HTML was the other one? How would you use that? What would that be like?
Yeah, actually we use that as well in my company. You just run remind with a special command line switch, which produces an intermediate format, and then there are other programs that convert that to something else. So the PostScript converter, for example, reads the intermediate format and generates PostScript. The HTML converter reads that same thing and generates HTML. So you get a nice calendar in your browser. And if you ever visit the Roaring Penguin offices, you'll see that we have a laptop bolted to the wall. That's our display. And it has our schedule on it, so you can see who's on vacation, who has the support pager, that sort of thing. And the web page is programmed so the browser automatically refreshes it once a minute. So you always have an up-to-date calendar on the wall. You don't need to use markers and boards to see who's in and who's not.
Now, this project, let's talk about the history of the project. This project's been around for quite a while, it seems like. When did you say you started this?
I started it in 1989. Yeah, it's been quite a while.
And then are you like the entire development team, or are there people working on this with you?
No, I'm the entire development team, although I have had contributions. The HTML converter was contributed by somebody. There have been a bunch of language translations that have been contributed by people, and probably code as well.
Is the development done in a public repository so people can see your wins and loses?
Yeah, we have a Git repository that's public read-only. And so, yeah, just go to git.roaringpenguin.com, and I think it's, sorry. Yeah, git.roaringpenguin.com, and then there should be a link to remind.git. You can always pull the latest development version from there.
Cool. And you say you do accept code contributions. What's this written in?
It's written in everything. Remind itself.
Okay.
Remind itself is written in C.
Okay.
And so is the PostScript converter. The GUI is written in Tickle TK, which I think is a terrific system, but seems to have fallen from popularity, in the last few years. The HTML converter is written in Perl, and some of the third-party programs like WXRemind are written in Python.
Okay.
And somebody wrote something, it's called Word, W-Y-R-D, and it's written in some strange language, Erlang or something, I think.
Wow. And is all this in your distribution? Or these are other third-party things, right?
Word and WX Reminder, third party, all the other stuff is in my distribution.
Wow. So I bet when you install this on some Linux distro, it's gotta, if you don't already have Perl and Python and stuff, and Tickle, it probably has to download a bunch of stuff, right?
No, actually, that's all optional.
Oh,
all you
okay.
need really is a C compiler, but if you want the TK front end, then obviously you need Tickle. Pretty much any Linux distribution would have Perl because the HTML front end doesn't need any non-core modules, so you're probably okay there.
I'm wondering if you could. I don't know. There's probably easier ways to do this, but I'm just thinking. I wonder if you could take this and make an Android app out of it to put in your own reminders, so they show up on the little notification bar.
I'm guessing you could. I don't actually have an Android device, and I've never done any Android programming. But assuming that you're allowed to build C programs on Android, it shouldn't be a problem.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends. I'll have to take a look and see if you're allowed to do that. Probably not. You'd probably have to write the whole thing over from scratch in Java and run it that way. But it'd be kind of cool if you could just drop that in and then create a little interface to do the text file part. You type in your reminder there, and then the reminder line, and then it would automatically just pop up notifications for you. I'm sure there's like 100 different tools that do that for you, but I don't know. I always like the being able to cross-pollinate these things.
Yeah, I mean, I assume re-implementing it in Java wouldn't be that hard. I mean, you just have to redo the remind algorithm, but that's not something I'd be interested in doing. If anyone out there wants to do it, that'd be great.
Right. So what's the I should follow up too. I mentioned Gina Trapani, and then I looked down on my Google search result, like the third or fourth result down is an article that Gina wrote actually for Lifehacker, where she praises Remind and talks about how to use it, and she's got some screenshots there, which are really good. So I guess I answered my own question. She's certainly aware of it and uses it, and like I said, it sounds like something that anybody that likes to do command line, it lives in the command line as a lot of us do. Right. Sounds like this tool would be perfect for.
Yeah, I actually never even heard of her until now, but now.
Yeah, so Gina does the she does a lot of things. She used to write for Lifehacker. I think she's still involved with Lifehacker to some degree. She writes a to-do text. It's basically I want to say an organizational tool, but it's command line based. But she's since expanded it out to running on interfacing with iPhones and iPads and Android devices and so forth. And then of course she also co-hosts the This Week in Google show, which comes up same day as we record FLOSS Weekly, but a little bit later on in the afternoon. So so I think that was kind of interesting. That and this was an article back from 2006. So yeah.
Remind has been around for a long time. So.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you said you started writing it in 1989, I think, and I don't want to make you look old, but I mean I graduated from high school in 1990, so. It's been around since for as long as I've been since I was in high school, so it's been around for a while. Now, what's the algorithm that is it a standard algorithm? You said that you had to replicate the algorithm if you wanted to rewrite it in some other language. Is there an algorithm that you publish or that you're using, or what is the algorithm?
Yeah, the remind algorithm is actually the heart of the whole program, and you have to understand it. I call that understanding the remind Zen. So if you go onto our website, roaringpenguin.com, and you go into the Remind page under open source, there's actually a slide deck from a talk I gave for a local users group, and it explains the Remind algorithm. So basically, when you write a reminder, you put in what's called a date specification. So the date specification could be really simple, something like 6th of January. What Remind does conceptually is it starts from the current day, so that would be January 25th, and it says, does this satisfy that specification? In other words, does January 25th match January 6th? And the answer is no. So then it goes ahead by one day, and it keeps scanning forward until it finds a date that matches. So if we started that today on January 25th, 2012, it would keep scanning forward all the way to January 6th, 2013, and that would be the date of the reminder. So it doesn't actually do that because that's way too slow, but it behaves as if it did that. So for really simple things like January 6th or a fully specified date like February 12th, 2012, it's pretty stupid. I mean, it just matches on the date it matches, and there's nothing magical about it. But when you start writing the more complicated reminders, the things that look for first full moon after the last Monday in a month, that sort of thing, in order to understand yourself when it's going to happen, you have to understand the algorithm, and you can kind of play that in your head, and that'll tell you when the reminder will trigger.
Is the description of that algorithm, that how it actually works, available somewhere? Or you just have to read the source code to figure this out? Or is there enough description and documentation to figure it out?
The description is in the source code, unfortunately. The other thing about the Remind source code is when I wrote it, I decided to implement a programming language. I'd never heard of Lex. I'd never heard of Yak. I didn't know what a recursive descent parser was even. So the parser is kind of handwritten by a guy who'd never done much computer science courses. It's idiosyncratic. It's really weird source code to read, but it works.
I saw in one description somewhere, I was reading a few of the articles about Remind, and one of them said, you have to put 2 spaces here. I don't know why.
Really? Okay, no,
yes.
that shit.
It was something about a RAM, and something was, had to have 2 spaces after it in order to do the kind of percent expansion. Maybe he fixed it by now, but a lot of that's the other thing I saw about this is a lot of the articles were from mid decade, 2005, 2006, and I couldn't find much that was written recently about Remind. But one of them said you got to put 2 spaces here. It's like that doesn't make any sense to me.
If that's true, it's a bug.
Well, now I can understand why. Because if you hand wrote your own parser, power to you, man. That's more than I've ever done. But because I always draw on all these wonderful tools instead because I'm lazy that way. So, is the source code then? If you had to do it all over again, would it look a lot different then? It's a bad question, I think. But go ahead.
I was thinking about that this morning. If I had to do it all over again, I don't think I'd use C. I'd probably take an existing scripting language and just add to it so that you could write your reminder file in that language. Because back when I wrote it, it was important that a reminder script always terminate because of the running it as root for everybody mode.
Yep.
Nobody uses it that way anymore. So I think a full-fledged scripting language with built-in functions for doing the date calculation is probably the way I'd go today. On the other hand, Remind is really small. I don't know how big the executable is, but let's see. It's like 150K or so of actual text, and it's really, really fast. So, I have a fairly extensive .reminders file with dozens or hundreds of reminders in it, and I can generate 1 year's worth of post-trip calendars in a second. So I'm really glad I wrote it the way I did because it's small and fast and unobtrusive.
And another thing I was noticing, going to your website, and I don't know, I suppose it's fair game. You have on the front page of the Remind that you say you have an argument against both Windows and Apple's or Mac OS 10. I was wondering if you could iterate your position on that for our audience and elaborate, perhaps.
Okay, sure. I'm not really happy with Microsoft. I think they're hostile to free software, and they will try all kinds of tricks to get a monopoly position. Like, for example, the secure boot controversy, I don't think is settled. They say, no, we'll let you boot alternate operating systems. But then on the ARM platform, they're saying, well, if you want to certify your ARM platform for Windows, it has to be only use secure boot with no way to turn it off. So those kind of tactics disturb me a lot. So I prefer people not to run Remind on Windows. Now, Remind is GPL'd. I can't stop people from running it on Windows. if you do it, that's your choice. I just rather you didn't. Now, in terms of Apple, I think Apple is actually worse than Microsoft when it comes to openness. Their platform is, well, for example, their iPhone platform and iPad platform is, in my opinion, completely closed. You can't really, in any practical sense, sell apps except through Apple. Apple has to approve all the apps, and they take a cut. So, to me, that's not an open system. I also think macOS is eventually going to move in that direction. Apple's going to push it as much as they can get away with. So again, if you want to run Remind on macOS, I can't stop you, but I prefer that you don't.
Yeah, no, and I find that interesting. I'm totally in agreement with you on the iPhone. The iPhone is a closed platform, and if it wasn't for jailbreaking, I probably wouldn't have an iPhone. So it's the only way I get it to do what I really want it to do, because other people are able to add the features that Apple doesn't want to approve of yet, or hasn't figured out how to write it in their system yet.
Right.
But I'm gonna say I don't completely agree with you about OS X. I think most of OS X is open source, built on open source stuff, and I think Apple does have a strong open source bent inside the company, because I know a lot of people that work in open source that work at Apple. So I hope what you're saying doesn't come true. I hope what you're saying about it moving more and more towards closed source doesn't come true, and I suspect it won't, just because I think there's again, I don't have a crystal ball. I can't tell either. But especially when they're they're building this whole new LLVM platform to try to get away from GCC and stuff. I think they're on the right track with all that stuff, and they're open sourcing everything they possibly can, as far as I can tell. There's some proprietary stuff that they have to lock up because of license agreements with other people. But anyway, so we could debate this endlessly in this call. But sorry, I was interrupting you. You want to say something?
No, I hear you, and there are probably lots of people at Apple, and in fact at Microsoft too, who are quite fine with open source, especially the technical people. But they don't dictate the marketing policy or the general direction of the company. I just say one more thing about Apple. I think you may be right about Apple not closing macOS. I think that might be more likely now that Steve Jobs isn't in charge. I think Jobs was definitely one for supreme amount of control. And maybe his successor will ease up a little bit. I hope so.
Cool. Well, and the other thing I want to say about this is, as I was preparing, of course, you mentioned some slide deck that you have earlier. And when I went to your website and tried to download the slide deck, you actually said you shouldn't be running OS X. And so I couldn't get to your slide deck from my Safari browser. Absolutely, yeah. And I'm saying, what I want to ask you now publicly is, please don't punish us for having chosen OS X. I agree that you could take a position about it and say, don't do that. But, what I had to do instead was I had to get the URL and then type a curl command line to be able to download it. But I couldn't see it in my browser because your website comes up and says, you can't see this on OS X. Forget it. Even though there's nothing OS X proprietary on it.
That must be ancient stuff on my website. I'll have to look at that.
Okay, please fix that.
Okay.
Because I know there's quite a few listeners to this show that actually, despite the name of the show, are running on OS X. In fact, if you go to like OSCON, or Scale, pretty much everything you see is Mac laptops. So
I know, and that's extremely distressing and disappointing.
Yeah, I'll just chime in here since we're on the topic. I have a MacBook here, right? And I choose not to run Mac OS. That was one of the nice things. I think that for me, I was always a little bit jealous of Mac people that liked Apple hardware because the hardware was always very nice. I just didn't agree with some of the things they chose to do with their OS. I don't agree that they chose to use BSD and then add all their crap into it and lock it down. It's just not in the spirit of how things are done in the open source world for sure. So what I did is as soon as they started coming out with Intel Macs, and I know people used to do this before with PowerPC based Macs, is I just run Ubuntu on top of it and it runs fine. And so I can appreciate the hardware. It's run. I've had it for 3 or 4 years. It runs great, but I'm running Ubuntu on it because I have kind of a similar stance as David has in terms of just the opinion. And I also used to block on my website. It used to detect whether you were using Internet Explorer or Firefox, and if you were running Internet Explorer, it would come up with a little pop-up that would say, "Hey, you're running Internet Explorer. you should probably go download Firefox, and here's why. And then I stopped doing that after a while because people were really complaining about it, and Firefox took off fast enough. I didn't need to do that anymore. So I used to do something similar, but I actually, on my website, but I actually took it off a long time ago because people were complaining. Because a lot of people were saying, hey, look, I don't have a choice. I have to run Internet Explorer from work, that kind of stuff. And I didn't want to penalize. I like to say penalize. I didn't want to penalize those folks that didn't have a choice. So I used to do something similar. So there's my 2 cents.
Okay. I can't find anything that would be blocking macOS from downloading that file. But, oh well.
I give you a screenshot. I tell you, it happens right when I go there. So, and it's just on the slide deck. I get to the rest of your site completely fine. It was just that one that we have the slides for your presentation. So, but anyway, if you can't find it, it's fine.
Anyway, we can fix that.
Yeah. So at this point, are there any new features on the horizon for Remind? I know that you're coming out with fairly regular releases now. I was looking through the changelog to try to figure out the difference between 3.0 and 3.1 because I was able to install 3.0 on my Mac, and FreeBSD came out 3.1. So I was trying to figure out, now am I going to be disconnected in terms of features? But what's on the roadmap for the future?
Well, actually, I just made a release recently that fixed some bugs in the and the dawn and dusk calculations. Mm-hmm. For the future, what I'm working on actually is a new web-based front and back end, because right now it's only one direction. You can take Remind and generate HTML, but what I want to do is build a framework for making web-based calendars. Mm-hmm. So Remind you'll get your calendar displayed in the web browser, and then you'll be able to click on a day or something and add your reminder in the full power of Remind, so that you can maintain a web-based calendar. And that it should be possible to make that somewhat multi-user, where you can give different people permissions to create and delete reminders. I should mention one of the other things I use it for. We internally in our office, we use IRC quite a bit just within our office. Mm-hmm. So we have a robot that listens in on IRC. So if I need to do something in 20 minutes, I can just type part of a Remind command line, and the robot will pick that up, and then they'll invoke Remind to remind me about it. So we have a kind of really quick IRC-based reminder system.
Wow. Sounds like fun. Now, we've talked a lot about various things about Remind. We're just about out of time here, so I wanted to wrap up. But is there anything that we haven't mentioned about Remind that you want to make sure our audience is aware of?
Well, I guess we should mention that it's really meant for sort of hardcore Unix people. Uh-huh. It's command line, so you have to be comfortable with that. So if you download Remind, I can guarantee that you'll either really like it or really dislike it. There's not going to be any middle ground.
It creates polarized responses in people who download it. That's pretty funny. I know that about a lot of products. There are a lot of people that like and hate various things, but there's nobody in the middle on a lot of stuff. So I completely relate to that. And I have to ask my usual questions here. I may know the answer to this already since you mentioned it, but Perl or Python or some other favorite scripting language?
That Remind's written in, or for my...
No, your favorite, what you like to use.
Oh, I hate them all, but I guess right now Perl is my favorite.
Yay! One for my side, thank you. And what's your text editor of choice? I know it's going to be one of the big Unix ones.
Oh, it's Emacs.
Yay! Ooh. Yay! In fact, the reason I knew that already is because I saw there's some .el files in the distribution, so you can customize Emacs to really work well with Remind.
Yeah, that was contributed, and we also have one for Vim, so equal opportunity.
Okay. I only saw the Emacs one because I was stripping through the source file there. Well, it's been a pleasure talking with you, and glad that you got a chance to come on and talk about Remind. So I just wanted to thank you from both of us, Aaron and myself. Thank you for being on the show, David.
Thank you. It was fun.
All right, great. That was David Skoll. He is the big honcho behind Remind, and sounds like this almost the sole contributor. So obviously but benevolent dictator doesn't really apply because I'd be dictating over yourself.
Right. Yeah.
Unless you're of two minds, in which case Remind would be the second mind. No, never mind. Oh, God. How bad of a pun can I come up with for that? That's horrible. So Aaron, you got any thoughts while we're wrapping up the show here?
Yeah, I mean, I love command line tools like this. I mean, I know they're not for everybody, but if you work in the command line a lot of times people do find it, once they get used to it, easier to work in the command line. I'm sure that's what is behind. That's the behind of everyone's joke. No, it's what's behind Ubuntu's latest announcement of their heads-up display, right? They want more people to use the keyboard for doing things as opposed to having to click around. And so I think that probably comes from, again, this kind of history of coders, people that use the command line a lot. It's just a lot easier to get things done sometimes. And the fact that you can write a very simple text script and set up reminders for the whole year and add to that as you need to, I think is really cool. It's something easy you can just do once and set it, forget it, and you're done. And also, I should say that the slides, I know you weren't able to get them, Randall. I downloaded the slides. It's just a PDF, and they actually detail quite well all the different things that you can do for the different ways you can use the tool and the different things you can do with it. So if anybody is interested, I would definitely go to the main page for Remind and actually download those slides and just walk through it. It's the easiest way to learn it by far, I think.
And one of the things I also liked about this thing is that the simple mode of using it is very simple to get to. I remember we did the show a couple years ago on org mode. And Emacs org mode was great, and then it was very, very complex. It has many, many features over the decade of development that's gone on. But there was still a way to use it simply. I mean, I use it for the show notes for this show. I'm constantly staring at the screen over here, and I've got single asterisk, double asterisk, triple asterisk sections that I can tab, fold, and unfold. And so just getting into it, I haven't learned anywhere near the rest of the things in org mode, but I can also see Remind being that sort of thing. Now, I drive my life off of OmniFocus, which is one of those getting things done things. So I don't know that I'd have as much of a desire to go to Remind for other things, but I think there are some things like the scheduling tasks in place of complex cron equations to be able to do that with Remind. And so I might actually start using this on at least on a server side on my FreeBSD box up in the cloud there to do this. So I'm glad I found out about it. I'm glad David wrote us and said I wanted to be on the show because here he is. Speaking of upcoming guests, there's my awkward transition for the week. We have a bunch of people. Well, we have a bunch of people that I asked to be on the show, but we only have 3 people currently in the queue. So we've got next week we have the auto test system, which is we've got. Let's see who's coming in to talk about that. That would be Lucas Magnagale Rodriguez and Cleva Rosa, and they're going to talk to us about Autotest. And Autotest, it says right on the web page here, is a framework for fully automated testing designed primarily to test the Linux kernel, though it's useful for many other functions such as qualifying new hardware. That sounds like a lot of fun. Following week, we're going to be talking about Turmeric. Turmeric is a buzzword thing. Turmeric is a comprehensive, policy-driven SOA platform that you can use to develop, deploy, secure, run, and monitor SOA services and consumers. Based on Java, follows all the standards and so on. It supports WSDL and a few other things, and also REST-style applications. That sounds like fun. That's actually something eBay developed for internally, and they've made it open source so the rest of us can use that. And finally, of the scheduled shows we have David Mercis coming in. I met him at Fizzly last year. He's going to talk to us about the Vega Security Tester, which is a penetration tester. Tests your website to see, make sure there's no known vulnerability, problems. No problems. Where is my tongue today? I do not know. Anyway, so there's a lot of other people still on the short list. I've been sending email out. It must be just a bad time of year, but we will have a full schedule before a week and a half from now, probably. So we will talk about that. If you go to twit.tv/floss, the spreadsheet is linked from there. And if you have suggestions, please email the project leader and have them email me. Although at this point, since I'm not getting any responses back, just go ahead and tell me about the project. The window is wide open now. Just tell me about the project you want on Floss Weekly, and I will do the research now because I really want to make sure the schedule gets full again. Merlin@stonehenge.com. Send an email to me, and we'll figure that out. You can also follow Floss Weekly on Twitter and Identica. It's Floss Weekly there. We also have a Google Plus page that I'm now starting to use, and Aaron, I got to get you access to it and get everybody else access so that you guys can post things there as well, not just me, because they opened it up a couple weeks ago where you have to have a branded page. So let's go to Floss Weekly in Google Plus and follow us there. We have a live chat room, which we occasionally look at. We've looked at it a couple times during this show at live.twit.tv. We tape at 9:30 a.m. on Wednesday mornings. That's Pacific Coast time. Pacific time. Pacific Coast. Like the West Coast, it's the Pacific Coast, right? We call that Leo time internally because it's Leo Laporte's home office time. But except for next week. Next week we're actually moving to 8:30. So if you're tuning in for the live show next week, be aware we'll have a schedule change. I'll announce that in all the normal places. You can follow me at Merlin, M-E-R-L-Y-N, on Twitter and Identica. Okay, my mouth is completely gone. I'm not going to be able to read the rest of the show. I'm also on Google Plus. I'm posting probably a dozen things a day. Look for me as Randal L. Schwartz there, middle initial L. For example, if you follow me on one of those places, you'll hear about the Git video that I did. A couple weeks ago, I announced I was going to do a 2-hour presentation for the UASC. I've just finished editing that. It's going to be really nice because I've got a screen capture, plus I have a really nice audio tapen from a Zoom H2 that was sitting near me, and they caught a wide video of me too, so I cut back and forth between the wide video and the slides, so it's really going to be a nice presentation. Watch for announcements about that. And I'm still keeping the beard. If you're watching the video, I still have my beard. I think I'm going to keep it at least until after Jonathan Colton Cruise Crazy, which is coming up in about 4 weeks. So one more of those Joko cruises. I'll look forward to that as well. That is enough plugging for me. Aaron, what do you want to plug today?
It's not easy being tongue-tied. No, so I just came back from Scale and actually did a podcast down there, so I'm in the middle of editing that. We'll get that up on the website shortly. And hopefully, if I time this right, I'll actually be on Drupal 7 by that point. I've kind of put that off to the side after I got frustrated with it, upgrading to Drupal 7. But I'll get the website finished, upgrading to Drupal 7, and then I'll post the new podcast for Scale 10X up on that site. So you can always go to thesourceshow.org if you want to see that. And the best place to follow me is on Google+. Add me to your circles. Or just go to AaronNewcomb.com and you can see what I'm doing.
Great, Aaron. And I want to apologize for everybody who was expecting me to hang out like all night in the bar at Scale on Saturday night. I was just horribly jet lagged by the time I got back from the East Coast, and so I went to bed early and just didn't come back. Sorry about that, guys. It was next year at Scale. I promise if it's not conflicting with something else, I will be at Scale. No problem. I'll probably still be working here, actually. Well, I don't know where I'm going to go. I'll be working in LA somewhere, though.
We should do a live Floss Weekly next time from Scale. I'm sure they would love that.
Presuming the date works and I'm still nearby. Well, I can always fly to LA even if I'm not working around here, I guess. That's not a problem. I do know about flight schedules these days. Okay, well, that's enough chatting, and I do hear the music coming from behind me, so let's go ahead and say what I always say at the end of every show, which is we'll see you again next time on Floss Weekly.